What's happening, everyone? Welcome to another LIFECAST, and this week we are going to be talking about risk taking. Before that, we've got Connor, who's just smashed our beers down.
Cheers, Connor.
Non-alcoholic this week.
We're on non-alcohol. Why is that?
Well, before we kick off on risk taking, probably good to mention why we are drinking non-alcoholic cider. Me and Paul went on a stag do. Was it last weekend or the weekend before?
Yeah, the weekend before, yeah.
And I think, to be honest, it's been a bit of a case, one of the podcasts that we done a few weeks back, on being the best version of yourself, because we spoke a little bit about accountability, which we'll come on to for next week. But you've got a Fitbit. I, after that episode, invested into a Whoop.
Yeah.
Tracks your sleep, you know, your heart rate, your alcohol, all that kind of stuff. Was doing really well. Went to Cheltenham with you, all day drinking, all night drinking, next day drinking a good, 20 hours maybe session, I don't know. It was a lot of alcohol.
It was heavy, wasn't it?
Consumed. I checked on my Whoop, see how I was getting on, and it just fell off a cliff. And it's made me a bit paranoid, hence the non-alcoholic.
It does, doesn't it? It does force you. Well, I mean, we're going to talk about accountability on the next podcast, but in so many different ways. But just that accountability to your Whoop or your, and you can just see what it's doing.
Yeah, and I think it just was the timing, the fact we'd done the best version of yourself. Yeah. I had one of the guys in the gym this morning come over to me and he said that was his favourite one.
Yeah.
And it was just about making those subtle changes.
Yeah.
And I was making those subtle changes, went on the stag do.
And it's going well.
It just all blew up. So, but I think on that point it will be interesting to maybe in a few episodes' time sit down and talk about how these LIFECASTs have affected you, if any.
Yeah, 100%.
And again, if anyone has been affected by them, let us know, because I think I rang you or texted you the other day and said I've actually made loads of changes and I view things differently just from our chats as well. So
we'll do that.
Might be interesting.
We'll do that. We've got a few more titles, haven't we, or topics from people that have come in. So we'll get them done, and then in a few weeks.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So this week's risk
taking. Yeah. I've got a few little different ways to go on. I think in business, I think in your personal life, I think in relationships, and I think on the drive in, I was thinking about what they kind of mean. I actually think they're affected by a lot of the other subjects we've spoken on, i.e., your level of risk taking depends on, how you're feeling. Are you being the best version of yourself? Your risk taking might be different compared to if you're feeling really low. I think your risk taking is affected by, the company you're keeping. Your risk taking is affected by, maybe it might be your financial situation. It might be if you're feeling lonely, if you're in a relationship. There's so many different levels to
failure. I think
fear of failure. So there's so many different levels of risk taking. But to kick it off, do you think, yes or no answer, do you think you're a risk taker?
I'm a massive risk taker, right? We talked about this just before, didn't we? I have a bit of an issue. Like, one of the things that I'm driven by is how you become the best version of yourself. But that really is about reaching your potential, isn't it? And I think what the education system and what society is really good at is dumbing you down. And I think one of the ways it does that, and I think there's the systems like education, right? When you're going through education, when I went through education, don't know what it's like for you, but you didn't have a topic, you didn't talk about taking risks in your life when you were going through it. And as we know, the education system was put together in the early 1900s, and it was to conform, wasn't it? It was to create a good workforce.
I didn't actually know this until you just told me then.
I don't know how true this is, but they say it was something to do with like the Rothschilds in like 1903, and I don't know whether it was then, but you can tell with the way the education system is that, in reality you were supposed to work in a factory, it's industrialisation, so they don't want people sparking, getting up and trying to be more than being a factory worker.
Having a go themselves.
Yeah, they want you to be a factory worker, they don't want entrepreneurs. So now we're in a day and age where people have got access to social media and or even media, but about being entrepreneurial or being commercial or being your own business owner or having a side hustle or whatever these things are. But the education systems, the fundamental systems that exist in the UK, is to dumb that in the world, should I say, in the first world, is to dumb that down to create a good workforce. So I think what's embedded within us is to not think above your station, right?
Stay in line.
Again, so I seen something before and it stuck with me, and I said it to you and you said, no way, I've just seen that. Somebody put on a post before and it might have been like a Jordan Peterson thing or something like that on Instagram, and it said it's a lot easier to make 10k than save 10k. And it did hit with me that, because what most people are taught is put money away for a rainy day.
Well, you've got another cracking saying about what your nan said, save the pennies, and you were like, that's a load of shit.
It was nonsense, isn't it? I mean, my grandma always used to say, if you look after the pennies, and the pounds will look after themselves. And no disrespect to that, but what a sort of, imagine where you're going to get with that outlook. You'll get where my grandma got, by the way, and that was probably the saying of the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, but it was about conformist. You know, you think rich people are looking after the pennies. You think successful people are looking after pounds, or then tens of pounds, or hundreds of pounds, or thousands of pounds. It's not even consideration. You know, when I work with private equity, it's easy to get a cheque for 20 million than it is 20 grand. That's a fact, right? Because that's the way the system works.
And that's all about risk, isn't it? All that kind of stuff, rather than the constant saving. It's, let's have a go.
So I think the thing is the company you keep, like my grandma in the early days, or your teachers at school, and then now we've become parents. My parents, I've already talked about when I was going to buy a villa, which was a risk, which I won't go into that. I can't remember which podcast the risk that I took on the property in Spain was on. I went through my mum trying to talk me out of that risk. Why? Because she was probably born in 1950 odd, and it was indoctrinated not to take risk. And I do think we have to be careful as parents in the current age that we don't pass that down to our kids.
Massively, yeah. You've had a few speakers on the Be The Standard, and I always remember there's been a theme with 2 or 3 of them, or whether it was them themselves or they told stories of entrepreneurs they knew, and they'd all rebelled against school, and that kind of conformity you're talking about, these guys were risk takers and kind of ended up getting expelled or left school at 15 and they went on to be millionaires, billionaires, etc. So there is definitely something in that where school's trying to get you to do one way and trying to dumb down that risk-taking theory.
Yeah.
On that business note, I asked you before we started if you've ever heard this story. I don't know if you lads have ever heard the FedEx story as well. So the story about the CEO, or the founder, whoever he was of FedEx, you know, the idea was getting stuff delivered pretty quick, obviously in America on flights, and it was going really well, and you could see there was an idea there, but for example, people weren't paying fast enough for them to fuel the planes to get going. And they had a big order coming in, and they knew he'd be okay in like next week or next month, whatever it was. But he never had the money to fuel this plane. He had you'll have to Google it and find the exact details, but it's along the lines of he had his last 20 grand in the FedEx business account. And there was no way, all resources were now gone. He had 20 grand that he needed to turn into 100 grand to get this plane fueled up, and then things would be okay. He goes to Las Vegas with the company credit card.
Oh, really?
20 grand, plays blackjack, poker, whatever he played, gets his 100 grand, walks away, pumps it back in the business, fuels the plane takes off, the orders come in, and FedEx is what it is now. So he was at a point of risk taking where he kind of thought,
Got to do a film about that, surely.
I don't know whether they have, but it's a true story. It's a 100% true story. I think he was an ex-US Marine, I think, as well. And it's always a fascinating story to think, you know, you could look at that and go, well, that was, you know, if that doesn't come off, it's a stupid risk and he looks like a fool. It did come off, and now FedEx is, you know, one of the biggest.
Is he going to lose all his money, or lose all his money though, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I suppose you could look at it that way, yeah. But I think maybe that's the point. But I think there's some people who just wouldn't even have that in them to take that risk, to think.
And here's the thing, right? So we won't. It's not a business podcast, so we won't dwell on the business too much. But when you look at a business owner, how much do you think they know what they're doing?
Well, you'd assume, yeah, they do.
I'm telling you, right? They don't, because when I set up this business, how do I know what I'm doing? How do I know what I'm doing?
You've studied in it maybe, or you've had experience.
I've studied accountancy, so I know how to be an accountant. But how do I know how to run a business when I set it up? The answer is I don't even know anybody who knows it. So I didn't know whether I knew how to run a business, and I'm learning on the job. So most people are winging it. Most people are winging it. And so that's the first thing. So then you go, well, what is it that makes them different to somebody else who doesn't wing it? And it's their capacity or desire to take risk, isn't it? Like now, who's telling me how to run this business today? Which is a different proposition what it was 10 years ago, or even 12 months ago. And in reality, it's just my ability to take risk. I don't actually know. I might have self-belief, but I don't know that I can take this from where we are today to where I think we're going to get it to. I don't know that.
But I think it's your then ability to manage risk, isn't it? I think that's where risk taking, I think, can become, if you like, dangerous, and you know, you're making bad decisions on risk, whereas like you say, self-belief and education and maybe experience can get you so far, but then it's your ability to manage it and know when to take risk and know when to maybe pull back. I think that's where risk taking is really important.
And I think most people are at that stage on a continuum where they're not willing to take much risk at all. And I don't just mean like you've got to set up your own business. You could be in a relationship that's relatively unhappy. And you always think, oh, but what if I end up on my own? Or what if you know, so...
I've actually got a personal story on that, and I don't mind kind of sharing it, but I remember, and it's funny, we speak about our parents a bit and the advice that they've given us. I remember I was in a relationship in the past, and thankfully we're great friends now, we get on great, but it wasn't meant to be. And I was speaking to my dad, and I was thinking, I need to end this relationship, but it's going to be hard, and it's head over heart, and it was a really tough time for me personally. And my dad kind of looked at me, and he was like, he had the mindset of, look, you've made your bed, you've got to lie in it now. And he kind of thought, I'm either going to end up with this girl or I'm going to end up alone and single. Yeah. And he kept on just saying to me, you know, it's this or that, you know, you pick. And then one day I said, you know what, Dad, I might leave this girl and I might meet someone else, you know. And he's like, no, but you know. And it was just like, it's like he didn't have, you can tell. And I think there's a lot of people for many different reasons, whether it's, I don't know, they financially kind of feel like they're stuck with them, or fear of judgment, or of kids maybe, why they're staying together. Yeah. And so many people are then scared to take that risk and think, actually, it might end up all right. Yeah. And I took the risk and left the relationship. And for both of us, it's worked out even better. Yeah. So I just think it's, like you say, it's not just about business, it's about everyday life, relationships. And
You've touched on some of that, because I was going to ask you a question. What do you think, when you talk about risk, right, you can, if you're not careful, you can just think about financial risk, because it's quite easy to look at a measurement. Oh, if I put 10 grand into that, or 1 grand, or if I leave my job, or whatever it is. But I actually think the thing that stops people taking risks more than anything else is their ego. That's what I think it is. I think that people are just scared to death to try something and fail. And they see the downside of failure or taking that risk as something that's probably more egotistical. Massively. Than anything else.
100% agree, because we live in an age now, we've already spoke about it on another one, with social media. So if you have an idea, let's be honest, and it's a business idea, for example, let's say, or you want to do something and it's going to be on social media, you're going to be pushing it, and then all of a sudden it doesn't work. Everyone's like, oh, Paul, how did that new venture go? Oh, it's your ego that's took a hit, isn't it? So I guess you then go into that mode where you're like, oh, it's not even worth taking the risk. Yeah. Because you're scared of that embarrassment of that, I tried something, now everyone knows I failed, and it's,
But in reality, who cares? Yeah. Who cares?
There's that saying, isn't there? No one cares about you as much as you care about you.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And it's so true, isn't it? You think everyone's like, oh, look at Andy Grant doing that or doing this, and no one gives a fuck, really. Yeah.
So I think, from you, going back to your original question, I don't know where it comes from, but I've always been a risk taker. I've always been somebody that would... It's even like as a kid, if there was a penalty, I'd step up and take the penalty. Do you know what I mean?
Where do you think that comes from? Do you think that's a natural thing, or it's something that over time?
I do think it's natural, yeah. I think I've always been a bit of an angry. I've always been a bit angry with the world. Probably, you know, and I've never really thought about this before. This is another one of them moments that I was starting to talk then, thinking, where are you going with this, Paul? But I think I've always been a bit angry with the world. Maybe just my start to the world, right, wasn't the best. I've always been a bit angry with that. So I've always been a bit like, fuck it, like, I ain't going to conform.
Yeah.
I'm not going to conform. I'm not going to get put into a box. And therefore, I'm going to be the person that steps up and takes the risk. And I think, like I say, I've done that since I was 8 years old. If my football team got a penalty, I'd take the penalty.
That's interesting, actually, because in your answer there, you've almost kind of flipped what I thought on its head, or maybe you haven't. I always think, you're in a better position to take risk when you're kind of feeling, your best version of yourself type thing. But in a way, you're saying there that maybe you started life, you wasn't the best version of yourself, so that made you take risk.
Yeah.
So it's kind of flipped what I thought.
It certainly meant that I was a non-conformist. And even when I went to college and uni and, the school was trying to push you into being a mechanic there's nothing wrong with being in them jobs, right? If that's what you want to be in.
Yeah.
But they were pushing me into a place that they wanted to be in, and that angered me. And that all the way, I guess I've been trying to prove wrong different things, systems, and that's been like a motivator to take more risk. But even as life has gone on then, and the business has become successful, I've had the ability maybe to sell the business, right, or cash out. I've had the ability to take less risk and maybe be more secure. But I run away from security towards more risk. And I put everything on the line all the time.
Has that bit you in the arse at times, though?
It always bites you. It's be careful what you wish for. But I also do believe that you've got to be a true version of yourself. If everything went wrong for me, right, if everything went wrong for me, the one thing I'd be able to turn around and say is, I gave it a shot and I lived the life I wanted to live.
You're going to say that Frank Sinatra had done it my way?
It is that, isn't it? But it feels like that intrinsically to me. I've not lived anybody else's life. I haven't lived anybody by the rules. I'm not very good at living by the rules, but and I would feel more content at the end of my days having tried and failed than not tried at all. And that involves taking risk. By the way, taking risk, the flip side of taking risk is it's quite exciting.
Well,
it's fulfilling. You're living life, aren't you?
Yeah. I asked you how it bit you on the arse because I've had experiences definitely where risk-taking has taken me to some dark places, if I'm being completely honest. When I came out the Marines, I was obviously in a job where it was exciting. There was a lot of risk-taking, as you can imagine, being in the military. And when I came out the military, I was in that place of pure security. I got pensioned off, got a bit of compensation, which allowed me to buy a house, and all of a sudden, just the ultimate security, ultimate comfort in the sense that, I'm not like sitting on a beach, but I'm comfortable. But I'm a bit like you, I'm a risk taker. So my risk taking for a couple of years ended up in gambling. And again, I still gamble now, I'm thankfully in control of it. But there was definitely a period where the risk was just, that was the only kind of excitement I was getting. You mentioned risk and excitement. And it became a problem. So that's why I can say, did it ever bite you in the arse? Because there's been times where I've been chasing excitement by risking things that you look back and you think, why the fuck did you do that?
Yeah.
So there's definitely times when, when risk, especially financially, when, it's good to go for it and it's good to hold back. And
Yeah.
100% agree with you, that risk thing can become exciting, and you could maybe take too much risk just because you're in love with the excitement and the adrenaline and the jeopardy that it brings.
There's the excitement. The other thing, the other side of risk is reward, right? There is a balance between how much risk you're willing to take and how much reward. If you look at the villa that I did, which, as you know, on a previous podcast, I bought a villa in lockdown, right, off an iPhone, in the middle of Marbella, and I've never even been to see it. And subsequently, that's bit me on the ass.
Yeah.
Right, because having finished the villa and it gone really, really swimmingly, getting a license out there, I've realised, is an absolute nightmare, and I'm just in the middle of a legal battle now.
That's another thing that's so interesting. You look at you and you go, wow, that. No one knows that.
Yeah.
Really. No one knows what's going on behind the scenes and the risk that you've
One
taken.
of the most stressful things I've ever been. The first year was one of the best things I ever did. I brought like a villa that looked like Alcatraz, right, and turned it into something that I like, and for the kids. And then it was brilliant, but the last year's been one of the most stressful, if not, it's probably the second most stressful thing I've ever done. So it's bit me on the arse, but do I think I'll overcome it? I do. One day I'll overcome it. And it's one of those where I think I've said this to you and lots of others, in 5 years, I'll probably sit back and go, it'll all be over. I'll be in the pool and I'll say to my missus or you or whoever, fucking hell, do you remember when we went through all that stress getting the licenses for this place, you know, to my missus? So I always think that, and there'll be high reward, but if I look at businesses, right, when we had Manchester here and we wanted to go into Leeds, if it didn't work, we would have gone bust. There's no other way of describing that. There's other ways in business as we've got bigger. I've found ways to de-risk. How can I cushion the blow? Right? I do look for them. But sometimes there isn't any way to cushion it. You know, I won't go into a massive business podcast because it won't be too many. But here we have like recurring revenues. So I'm able to take more risk from a position of recurring revenue, right? But when I did Leeds, if that didn't work, it was bust. By the way, before that, I think I told you, we had about 20 staff in about 6-7 years into the business. And I took an office space, signed a 10-year lease in Manchester, which would have been for, say, 2 million quid. And I was living in a house at the time that was worth 160 grand. And I personally guaranteed it. 2 million quid. I had a house. By the way, there was 140 grand mortgage on that 160 grand house. So I had 20 grand. Going back to what Neil said before, what have you really got to lose? You can't lose 2 million quid if you've got 20 grand equity. But you can lose your house, you know. And even today, and this is a big business now, but a lot of people don't understand this. They think you're a success if they deem you as one, financial, from what they see. And they think that means that status of success is eternal. And it's
every day it's up for risk, isn't it?
Well, I personally guarantee this business. So every bank, debt proposition, asset finance, whatever we've got to get where we've got to today, I personally guarantee the lot.
Yeah, that's a risk. So when someone sees it, almost like living the high life, if you like.
Yeah.
They don't see the risk behind it.
No, it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
The risk really is all or nothing. I think people don't see that.
I think if and listen, this is a personal preference, and I think I know the answer to you, and I guess where it comes with risk, there are some people, for example, my 2 sisters, if you could guarantee them their whole life, and I'm talking the size of the house, how nice it is, the car they drive, the financial situation, holidays they go on, even towards even the sex life, not that I'm thinking about my sisters having sex, but every aspect of their life, if I said to them, you can either have like, sometimes there'll be 1s, sometimes there'll be 10s, or you can have just a steady Eddie 5 all the way. My sisters would pick 5 over everything, the whole life. They would, and I think they'd be happy with that. You know, everything was just not great, but not shit. It's just me. I'm like give me the 2s and give me the 9s and give me the 3s, give me the 10s, and I'm imagining, you know, like that.
Because I would take the bet that there's more above the line than below the line. I'd be willing to bet that.
And I think that's where the whole risk thing comes in, and I think I'm a bit like you in the sense that I'd rather have a go. And at least, listen, it might not work out, but when you're on your deathbed and you look back, you go, you know what? I fucking had a go. Do you know what I mean? I tried my best and I've done it my way, and I think that's the way to go with it.
I think that is the important part. There's no right way of anybody to live a life, is there? There's no right way to go between 2 and 10 or stick at 5. But I think if you're the type of person that wants to look at the highs being a 7, 8 or a 9 or a 10, and you just stick in a 5, that's the part that I feel is a bit, I don't know if sad's the right word, but...
It's that I've seen a quote and it said, my biggest fear is unfulfilled potential.
There you go.
And that's where you need risk, because you need to risk it and try and fulfill that potential. You
know, I've said this a million times before, because people expect you to talk about millions and businesses, but actually, some people start in position, getting a full-time job, sticking around, being a dad to 2 or 3 kids, staying in the same marriage for 30 years.
Maxing out.
That is like maximum potential reach, and you should pat yourself on the back and be proud of yourself.
100%.
But if you're doing that, and you know that there's so much more, but you won't take risks because of, and I think the biggest one is, when you drill it down, some of it's finance, but when you drill it down, a lot of it is because you want to save face. You don't want to fail. You don't want people's opinion of you to change. I think those superficial ones, I think as you get on in life, you'll regret not doing it. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, there was once, I think it's a great way to end it where you've nailed it there. I seen a thing and it said, it was this old entrepreneur kind of guy who's done really well for himself, you can tell, and he said the advice he got from his parents was something like, try everything in your 20s, figure out what you're good at in your 30s, make money from it in your 40s, and then try and enjoy it in your 50s. And he said, then when you get to your 60s, you'll realise that no one cared about you. Like, no one was bothered or cared enough anyway about you. So you sometimes can spend all that time worrying about what people think of you. And then you're going to get to an age where you realise no one gave a fuck about me anyway type thing. Or, you know, so I think definitely, drop your ego and maybe, take a risk when's needed. I enjoyed that. Again, let us know. I know a lot of people reach out to me and Paul on a personal level on the Instagram and stuff and Twitter. Keep them coming. It's been great listening to how the different episodes have affected you and maybe altered the way you live your life as well. And I think we'll definitely do one of those episodes where we look back on maybe how me and you have changed our views on life as well. But thanks for the support as always, and we'll see you next week.